We're going to wait about 2 more minutes and see if we can get the rest of them who are finishing up enjoying being together. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here today. We are very glad to have all of our regular people who would be here, but if you are visiting with us today, we are so glad that you are here. I'm one of the shepherds of the congregation. On behalf of all the shepherds here and the members, we want to welcome everybody and tell you that if you have any questions about anything, that some of us will be at the back all during the seminar today, so feel free to ask us anything you'd like to ask us. I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what it would be like today. We're going to have 2 sessions this morning, one that'll start in a few moments whenever I get through, and then one that will start around 10:30 after a short break between the two. We'll have lunch at that point over in the adjacent building next door, and then we'll have an afternoon session back in here. If you need anything to drink, there'll be coffee and water out there at all times. We may even have some surprise snacks depending on what Dean brought with him. So we'll see what happens between the sessions. We're very fortunate this morning to have with us Dean Miller. Dean is a man of God, a faithful Christian, a teacher, a father, a grandfather, and one who loves the Lord with all of his heart. He has a passion for the session that he is going to talk to us about today, and he's put together this seminar especially for you. And he's going to share his experiences with you and give you his understandings. Also, I wanted to let you know that before he gets up, if you have one of these cards, be sure and fill it out and drop it in one of the baskets at the back of the auditorium. And if you're sharing a folder, we have plenty of folders. We'd like for everybody to have their own folders. And again, we are so fortunate to have Dean Miller with us today. Dean, it is all yours.
Boy, that is dangerous. It is all yours. You have no idea the risk you've taken in coming here this morning. I want to tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you have invested some time this morning in being here. I want you to know how I feel about that. Time is a really precious thing. We only have a limited amount of it, and for you to take time out of your life to come here, I want you to know that I appreciate the value of that investment. I will make sure that I respect that, and I want to do the very best that I can, that when you leave today, that you reflect on your experience and you think about it and you think, wow, that was really worth my time and effort. I know that there are other places you could be this morning, but you're not, you're here. And I realize there are other things that you could be doing, but you're not, you're here. So I want to tell you how much I appreciate that. I think it speaks volumes about your values. And I think it speaks volume about your wisdom. Because here's the reality about all of this. You cannot go through this life without experiencing loss. You just can't. It's just not possible. The nature of the world is such, and our human nature is such, that there's no way in the world, living in this world with all these other folks, that we're not going to experience loss. Now, would it be better to know something about it beforehand? Well, I think so, about anything. And that's especially true when it comes to really big challenges. Now, I also realize that this is a heavy subject, that sometimes it can be even a touchy, a difficult subject for people to be exposed to. That's another reason why I appreciate you coming here, that despite maybe a hesitancy that you might have, you have chosen to face that hesitancy and come here anyway. I think it's really important when you're talking about heavy stuff or you're going through heavy stuff to make sure that you appreciate something that you have that you want to make sure you don't lose. There's one thing I think that's really important that you don't lose. It's not the only thing, but it's one thing that's really important that you don't lose in your life, and that's your sense of humor. Don't lose your sense of humor. Proverbs 17, verse 22 says that a merry heart does good like medicine. So that merry heart is very valuable. Now, with that in mind, let me tell you about this lady who, she opened her eyes, and she began her day this way, with a prayerful spirit. She said, Lord, thank you so much for this day of life. She said, I'm so proud of myself. I've not been greedy, grumpy, nasty. I haven't gossiped or lied about anybody. But in a few minutes, I'm fixing to get up out of bed, Lord, and I'm going to need a lot of help. Please be with me. Amen. Maybe you can relate to that. I heard another story about this person who got up in the morning. Some of us take medicine in the morning, okay? And this lady, she said, you know, I have bad news and good news. The bad news is, well, no, let me get started with the good news. The good news is I took my medication. The bad news is I'm going to be free of fleas and worms for the next 3 months. You know, you probably could relate to maybe taking the wrong medicine sometime. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about something that is pretty heavy, but we're going to also interject some lightheartedness in it. I think it makes it a little bit easier to handle. What we're going to be talking about this morning in this first session is life, love, and loss. I didn't come here to preach at you. Now, if you come back in the morning, and I hope you do, I am going to preach at you during worship service. But all the other sessions are more like open discussions. I want you to feel free to catch my attention, raise your hand. I want you to feel free to offer some insight that you have. And I want you to feel free to ask any question that you want. This is a very free and open atmosphere. You don't even have to turn your phone off. If your phone rings and it plays the Texas fight song, I mean, it's not going to be embarrassing. You're not going to hear the Ohio State fight song on my phone this morning. I did turn mine off, but you don't have to turn yours off. And if you need to get up and stretch and stand in the back, that's fine too. So, pardon me? Go Buckeyes. Yes. They play this afternoon. Yeah. I-O. Yes. Okay. I remember, this reminds me of it was at Champions in Houston, the Champion Church in Houston. And these guys at church there, that Saturday, no, it was that Sunday that I was there for the workshop, they all had different socks on. I mean, there was a Texas A&M sock pair, and there was a Texas Longhorn sock pair, and I had my Ohio State University socks on, and I thought that was an unusual thing. I like the diversion of college football in the fall. Let's get back to what we're here for. We're here to talk about life, love, and loss, and I want us to think out loud together. That's what I call it. I want us to think out loud together. Now, I've been a preacher for a number of years. I've been to the hospital a lot of times when births have occurred. A lot of times I've heard people say, oh, what a cute baby, what an adorable baby. Well, I've never yet seen an ugly one. Now, some of us get born and we trend ugly pretty quickly, okay? But you're not born ugly, okay? Now, I want you to stop and think with me for a little bit about where life is lived. Now, what I want you to do for a few moments is, in a group this large, surely we can come up with 6 or 7 different words or phrases that you would use that would accurately describe the world we live in. Give me a word or a phrase that would accurately describe the world that we live in. Shambles? Yeah, shambles. What else? Confused, shambles, confused. Chaos, it's chaotic. Yes, give me another one. Temporary. Beautiful. Painful. Complicated. Amen to that. Yes. You know, there are a lot of different words or phrases you can use to describe the world. Now, did you notice in the words and phrases that were used, with the exception of one, there was a common thread that ran, they were negative. Is the world negative? Is life negative? Sometimes it is, isn't it? It is. That's the reality. Sometimes it is. See, that's why we need to talk about this stuff, is because life isn't always a bed of roses. If it were, there are thorns in the roses. You know, the reality is there are two different kinds of things in life that would be good to think about right now. Blessings and burdens. Now, when you look at this image that you see, when you look at this image, what does that communicate to you when you see that image? There's more blessings than burdens, okay? More blessings than burdens. But do we always feel that way? Sometimes life can get really ugly. I mean, really, really, really ugly. I've already talked to some of you about the losses that you've experienced. Sometimes life can be heartbreaking. You know, some people talk about life being unfair. And I understand why people say that, but there's an extreme to that unfairness that I think we also need to recognize. Life at times can be cold, callous, heartless, and brutal. You know, there are times that life bites. It's not just unfair, but it bites. And it can bite so hard that it's like it's bitten a chunk of your heart out. And you can experience a pain that you never, ever imagined yourself ever experiencing in your life. Life has blessings and life has burdens. How do you deal with that? Well, I'm going to suggest to you that there's a guy in the Bible that, if you've read about him, you hold him in high regard because he's deserving of being on a pedestal. His name is Job. Now, I want you to give me a word or a phrase you'd use to describe Job. What kind of a guy was he? Faithful, hopeful, he was persevering. I mean, he's not your normal, average, run-of-the-mill Joe or Job. Blameless, upright, this is Job 1, verse 1. One who fears God and shunned evil, and that wasn't his reputation. That was what God knew about him. There's a difference between reputation and character. God knew his character. God knew his heart. God knew everything about Job. And as a matter of fact, when Satan came to God and questioned the integrity of Job, let me read to you a verse in verse 8. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth." He had no equal. And then right after that it says, again, blameless, upright, one who fears God and shuns evil. Now, this is, can we at least say, this is one amazing spiritual giant. I mean, the description of him is the description of a spiritual giant. Now, what did Job suffer in the way of loss in that story? Everything, but we're going to get more specific because when we deal in generalities, it doesn't have the impact. Let's talk specifically. What did Job lose? Children. How many children? 10. All of his children. In this big room here, how many of you have experienced the loss of a child? A number. And by the way, I include in that prenatal loss as well as after birth. We need to recognize that as a loss too. So here is Job. He has 10 children. By the way, wasn't that smart of him and his wife? I'll tell you, Mr. Job and Mrs. Job were really smart because they had a huge farm, a bunch of critters. You're going to need farm hands. 10 children would come in real handy, wouldn't they? So they were pretty smart. So he loses 10 children. What else did he lose? He lost his house. Well, he has this report. Bang, 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 bang. He has these reports come in, successive losses, where he's losing his possessions. What was the big possession, the valuable possession? He had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. Animal, all kinds of critters, just all kinds. And he loses them all. Yeah, he lost his business, his prosperity. So what else has he lost? Keep thinking. Okay, he lost his health. Remember initially, and by the way, the book of Job isn't just a book about human suffering. It's a book about the sovereignty of God. God was sitting on the throne. When Satan questioned the integrity of Job, God was in control. And it was Satan who said, God, the problem with Job, the reason why you don't see him as he really is you've built a hedge around him. You're pouring all the blessings in, and there's no burdens. God, if you'd mess with him, he would reject you. He wouldn't be the person you claim that he is. Well, then Satan said, okay, start taking those burdens away, or those blessings away. And God said, I'm not going to do it. If you want to mess with him, Job, you go right ahead, but don't you lay a hand on him. Don't you lay a hand on him. See, God is drawing the lines and forcing Satan to color in the lines. And Satan does bring great pain to the life of this great man. He loses even his health. He has sore boils all over. He's sitting there scratching himself with a potsherd, a broken piece of pottery. The guy is in agony. Can you think of anything else that he lost? His friends? Somebody said his wife. In what sense did he lose his wife? What did she say? Curse God and die. Now I'm going to ask you to kind of take a different perspective about her, because sometimes we're awfully hard on her and berate her because she said that. I want you to stop and think about her for a minute. You know, we focus so much attention on Job. What about her? What did she lose? Everything that he lost, at least it seems, except her health. He lost his health. But she carried 10 children within her. She gave birth to 10 children. She lost every single one of those 10 children. She lost all of those animals. She lost all of that prosperity. She saw her husband burdened severely. And what happens when we see somebody we love in pain? How does that affect us? We suffer too, don't we? Sometimes to the extent that we say we wish it was us and not them. Now, are you surprised that she snapped and said, curse God and die? Think about what the woman was enduring. Think about what she had suffered. I'm thankful that we have a long-suffering, patient God who understands our frailty, understands our human struggle, and understands that sometimes we're not going to be everything that he wants us to be. She was grieving the losses that he was grieving. And on top of that, she was grieving his pain that he was experiencing. And she snapped. Now, she's not the first person who ever snapped after suffering great loss. It happens. And the reason it happens is because we're human. See, we're not an engine in a car. You know, we're not a laptop. You know, we're not a toaster. We're human beings. Human beings have thinkers and feelers. Each one of us has a thinker and a feeler. I know you're not going to read about that in a anatomy and physiology book, but everybody has a thinker and a feeler. And when we suffer great loss, sometimes what happens is, and a lot of times if it's severe loss, our feeler gets in overdrive, becomes obsessive, and we can't even think straight anymore. Now, I want you to see something about Job. Now, we put him on a high pedestal primarily because of the description God gave of him, and then also because of twice it says about Job did not sin nor charge God foolishly. That's in chapter 1 and chapter 2. If you're reading the book of Job, don't just read the first 2 chapters and then chapter 42. There's a lot of really good stuff between chapter 3 and chapter 41. Job snapped. He said things that were way out of line. How do I know that? He admitted it in chapter 42. He confessed to God that he was way out of line in some of the things he said. For years, I've read this story and never noted this until somewhat recently. I want to read to you Job 7 and verse 6. I'll bet the first part of this verse you've heard at a memorial service probably. Job 7 and verse 6 says, "My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle." Boy, isn't that true? Now, I've never been around a weaver's shuttle. I kind of get the impression there it must be fast, okay? I've not done any weaving in my days. But life does go by really fast, doesn't it? Really fast. But have you ever read the second part of that same verse? Now remember, who said this? A great man of God. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope. Was Job without hope? Stop and think about that. Was Job without hope? I like what she said. At that moment, he felt like that he thought he was. Did he have a God in heaven who loved him, who cared for him, who was providentially watching over him, making sure that Satan did not do something to him that he was incapable of handling with God's help? In the book of Romans, God is described as the God of hope. If we have God in our life, we are never without hope. Never. It doesn't matter how heartbroken we are, how crushed we are, how much in agony we are. Doesn't matter how we feel. The reality is we are never without hope if we have God in our life. Never. Job said he was living without hope. See, this great man of God, even he snapped and said something like that. But again, remember, God is a long-suffering, patient God. God understands about the struggles that we have, and sometimes we say stuff. When we get all cranked up emotionally and we're really struggling, what kinds of things do we say? Things we would not typically say when we're in normal condition and have normal circumstances. But when things get bizarre in our life, when things get scary in our life, we will say and do things that are just uncharacteristic for us. Why? Because we are human. As a matter of fact, I'll submit to you, in Job 14, verse 1, he said something else that proves that he had a real problem, a real internal problem, a problem about his perspective and what was happening to him inside while he was suffering. This is in Job 14, verse 1. I know that you've heard this verse before. Man who is born of woman, by the way, is there any other way to be born? Okay. Well, man who is born of woman, now he was right about that. There's no doubt about that. And then he says, is a few days. Now, was he right about that? Man that is born of woman is a few days. Now, why on Facebook, when somebody reaches 90 plus, or maybe 100, there's these postings on Facebook, and everybody talks about how long that person has lived. But yet, Job said, is a few days. Is 90 plus or 100, is that a few days or not a few days? Oh, not in God's time. I remember driving in Jackson, Tennessee one day, and after my wife passed away, I would never listen to the radio that had music. Because a lot of songs are songs of love and romance and things like that. That's the last thing in the world I wanted to hear. So I would listen to talk radio. And this fellow was preaching on the radio when I was driving in the car. And he said something that really caught my attention. I'd never heard this before, and it's so accurate, it's so right. He said, wisdom, now think about how you've had wisdom defined to you previously. He said, wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. Boy, when he said that, I thought, wow, that is a powerful observation, because he's right. When you have wisdom about human relationships, it's when you see human relationships the way God does. If you want wisdom about marriage and family, then dig into his book and look at marriage and the family the way he does. If you want wisdom about how to deal with the troubles and trials of life, look in God's book and develop his perspective about how to do that. When we have God's perspective about something, we have wisdom about that subject. It is a few days, no matter how long, because Isaiah tells us God inhabits eternity. See, what he sees is he sees a video. We human beings, we think snapshots. As a matter of fact, we probably, all those of us who have phones, we have probably hundreds, even thousands of pictures, images in our phone. We live with snapshots. God always sees the video. The video has always been running and always will run. He inhabits eternity, and he is eternal. So it is a few days. Job was right. Man that is born of woman is a few days. Psalm 90 and verse 10 talks about that very thing. 70, maybe 80 years. Well, but then there's another phrase here. Man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Now I want to ask you, this great man of God, this awesome spiritual giant, he said, man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Was his life full of trouble? No or yes? At that moment, what? At that moment, I want you to rethink that for a minute. Let's take Job at his worst. I mean, when things were the most awful time in his life. He had suffered all those losses we've just talked about. Okay, now I want you to think about the flip side. Think about his blessings when he was suffering horrifically because of all of his losses. What did he still have? Oh, there's a very top of the list, God. The God of hope, by the way. You know, he said he had no hope. He had the God of hope in his life. He had a God who loved him more than anybody else. He had a God in heaven who knew about him, both inwardly and all of his circumstances, knew more about him than anybody else. He had a God in heaven who could do anything in the world to provide for Job, no matter what his life circumstances were, prior to his entrance into eternity. Now, how much bad stuff would you have in your life to outweigh the blessing of having God in your life? Now, I want you to think about lesser things. Now, stop and think about this. He had lesser things, things of lesser value. He still had a whole bunch of blessings. Can you think of any? He still had his wife. Now, I know people are going to say, but she sure wasn't a 5-star wife. Well, Yeah, and I kind of figure he wasn't always a 5-star husband either, okay? We are human, okay? But he still had a wife. Do you know what some of us would give to have that blessing back? Do you know what a precious, I think a lot of people can appreciate that, or choose not to participate in deeper gratitude because they haven't experienced. Sometimes when you experience the loss of something, one of the blessings of that burden is you come to appreciate a whole lot more what you had. I remember sitting at the nurse practitioner's office, and my nurse practitioner, who was a member of the church, he was going to be coming in, and I decided before he came in, as soon as he came in, I was going to address him first. I wasn't going to let him address me first. So he walks in the door, and I said, "Hi, Brent." I said, "When do people appreciate their health?" What do you think he said? Just like that. When it's gone. Yeah. Isn't it a shame that we're like that? That we sometimes don't have the appreciation we should have for people and things until we lose them. And then we think, oh, what a treasured blessing that was. Did he have a beating heart? Was the blood still coursing through his veins? Did he still have neurons popping between his ears? Did he still have a wife? Did he still have a God in heaven who loved him? I submit to you that the picture you see on the screen was always true in Job's story. He just always wasn't feeling it. And I will submit to you more personally that the image on that screen depicts your life and my life, no matter how we feel. See, feelings are not always consistent with reality. I'm not bad-mouthing feelings. I love feelings. I love the good ones and positive ones a lot more than I love the bad ones, okay? But we've got to realize that sometimes our feeler can have too much dominance, even become dictatorial in our life, and we can find ourselves not able to see our blessings because we are so burdened in our life. I want to challenge you, never, ever let that happen. That's going to be a hard challenge. Never let that happen. Yes, sir. We don't always feel what we know deeply. Yes, sir, that is correct. That's what I'm trying to point out. See, sometimes we're impatient with ourselves and impatient with others because we're not and they're not like we think they ought to be because they're Christians. You know what the problem with being a Christian? There is a problem with being a Christian. You're a human too. If you could take the human part out, it'd be a whole lot easier to be a Christian. The reality is we have fluctuations. We're not always what we want to be. We're not always what God wants us to be. And there are times when we're going to, this brother used a very kind word, have fluctuations. I'm going to use the word, there are times you're going to snap. And it's okay to snap. And God knows the reason why you snapped. And He has no problem with you having those fluctuations and struggles as you navigate a really difficult time in your life. Please be patient with yourself, just like God was patient with Job. Stop and think about, from chapter 3 to chapter 41, a lot of that section in the book of Job is Job and his 3 friends doing all this talking. So much of it was way out of line, but God let him say it. God just let him, God didn't come down and strike him with lightning and say, whoa, you guys need to change your perspective. He let them go ahead and go on and on and on. And He only interjected Himself. I'm kind of wondering if that's good therapy sometimes. Sometimes good therapy is us just going ahead and saying what we feel as a way of helping us process what we're going through. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you. He was human. You're so right. That pesky little human, that must be a Texas phrase. I'll have to use that other places I go. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Even though he knew a few moments later he died, but he still was feeling that pain because it's the gift of humanness.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always negative. It does help appreciate the value of anything.
That's right. If we didn't have, we can't always have positive feelings in a negative world. And the world is broken. We live in a broken world. We live in a fallen world. This is not paradise. This is a fallen, broken world. God has us here for a purpose, to seek Him and glorify Him while we're here. But that's going to be a struggle. And there are going to be times when we're not going to be what we want to be, or we're not going to be what God wants us to be. And so we have to humbly recognize that fact. Again, let me emphasize, please be patient with yourself when you're going through difficult times. Please be patient with other people as well. What we're going to do is we're going to sing a song to remind us about this. Cheryl Wayne LaHawn often accompanies me. He's 70 plus years old, lost his wife a little over 10 years ago, a few days and 10 years ago. And he loves to sing, and I want him to lead us in this song. We're going to sing all the verses, and then we're going to sing the chorus one time. A good reminder to us.
When you feel that those burdens. One of the best ways to praise God at that time. We all get a little, I taught elementary school for 38 years. After we sit for a while with our tummies full, the eyes kind of go like this. So I'm going to ask you to stand. To kind of, if you can't, that's totally understandable, but get a little bit of the blood flowing. When up on my billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by
in this world, what happens is we become intentionally or unintentionally attached to things. Somebody name the movie? Christmas Story. Yeah, now, here these two boys, you know, and this kid, this poor, naive kid is being encouraged, challenged, and you don't back down from a challenge when you're an elementary school male. And so, do you really think that Flick intended to get his tongue attached to that pole? But it happened, didn't it? What happens in life is we become attached to things, and sometimes we become attached to things unintentionally. Sometimes we become attached to things intentionally. Now, when you get a four-legged critter from the pound or from a breeder, it's called a pet. Okay, what does that pet morph into? A child, family. You become the parent of a four-legged critter. Okay? See, we become gradually attached to things. Now, there are also sometimes things that we intentionally become attached to. I did not go to church when I was a kid until I was a teenager. My dad decided to come back to the Lord and come back to the church, and so we started to become a church-going family. And frankly, I had no interest in the Lord. I didn't know the Lord, never read the Bible. If you would have said, "Who's Noah?" I would have said, "That's my uncle. He lives out in Tulsa." So my dad decides to start to go to church. Well, though I had no interest in the Lord, I saw this girl. Her name was Ruth Ann. And I became intentionally attached to her. We became friends. And then we became the sole people that we dated. And then we graduated from high school the same year. And then a year later, we got married. I intentionally attached myself to her. Now, what happens is, whenever we live in this fallen, broken world, the things and the people that we become attached to. See, one of the deals in this life is you don't always get to keep your blessings as long as you'd like. So what's going to happen is we're going to experience loss. And it's going to do a number on us. No matter what our age is, no matter how much life experience we have, no matter how much wisdom we have, no matter how much faith we have, no matter how long that we've been a Christian, it is going to have an effect on us because we're human. A loss is a loss. And a loss is hard to deal with when you're talking about something that really mattered to you. Now, I want you to think out loud together with me. Surely we can come up with at least a half a dozen. Think of a half a dozen things. Now, don't think people now. Think things. Things that a person could lose, that if they lost it, it would shake them up. They'd grieve because of it. Their job? Yeah. Clyde Grimmett worked for Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Akron, Ohio. They came in one day, 39 years, high-level accountant. They came in one day and they said, "Clyde, we're going to move your job down to Nashville." He said, "I don't want to go to Nashville." And they said, "We don't want you to go to Nashville either." That's how he was dismissed from the company. He grieved because of that loss, because that job of his, he was no ordinary employee. That old boy would get up on Saturday morning and go into work. He did his job, and he did it extremely good. He was a great employee. That had become a part of his identity. And they'd taken a part of his identity away. And he grieved because of it. The weird thing about that was his wife celebrated it because she wanted to move to Texas. That's where the grandkids were. So she's happy. He's grieving. Imagine what it was like at home for a while. I mean, that'd be kind of a difficult thing to deal with. By the way, they came back to him things were a mess in the company. I know this because my daughter works for that company in Nashville. And she said, Dad, man, things were a mess when they let him go. And then people started complaining. And so they went back to Clyde and said, Clyde, we'd like for you to come back and to help us out. What do you think was his response? This mere mortal human being, this Christian man, ain't no way. I ain't coming back. No way. He was hurt. He was deeply hurt by the loss that he had experienced. Then what happened was things continued to be a mess, and they came back to him. And he tells me this story. He says, Dean, they came back to me and said, Clyde, what would it take to get you to come back? And he said, Dean, I named a number I knew they wouldn't match, and they matched it. And he went back for a few months, and he was grinning as wide as a Chessy cat. He was happy again. Yeah, the loss of a job. You know, we should not minimize that. That has an effect. If you valued that job, and especially if that job was of any connection to your personal identity, it's going to cause you to grieve. In a way, it's going to cause you to grieve. Now, think of something else you could lose. A marriage. You know, losing a marriage doesn't just happen when a person dies. Divorce is a loss that causes grief. If the divorce was a divorce you didn't want, life has forced you to deal with something you don't want to deal with. But see, that's what life does. Life gives you blessings. Life also gives you burdens. And you just have to deal with them. So, this loss of a marriage, stop and think about the loss of the marriage. When the two people were up here and they both said, I do, made a lifetime pledge, they had the beginning of a special companionship. They had hopes and dreams and plans. They didn't just lose their marriage, they lost everything associated with that marriage. Divorce is an awful experience. We need to recognize the grief that is natural when somebody has lost their marriage by divorce. How about something else that you could lose that would really shake you up? Your home. Now, what is the big deal about the home, though? Because I can go on Zillow, if you give me your address, and I can find out the overvalued price they put on your house. I can see that. What is the big deal about the loss of your house? Now, why are the memories a big deal? I'll grant you memories, and the memories are a big deal, but why? We've invested ourselves, okay? What else? Identity, what else? Family. Oh, now we're getting, see, that's people. Let me give you in a nutshell what life is. Life is people and relationships and experiences. That's it. That's what life is. It's people, it's relationships and experiences. In that home, you have interacted with other people that you have relationships with, and you've had experiences with them. And that home has not just a monetary value, it has a priceless, sentimental value. But you're living in Fort Myers. And the hurricane comes. And now you have no house. Now, by the way, if you lost your house, what is it about in the house that would matter to you? Every time, that's always the answer to that question. Pictures. Why are the pictures, those old pictures are just a piece of paper with an image on them. Why do they matter? Memories, and the memories involve people. See, that's why we grieve. We place such a high value. Could be monetary, but then also sentimental. When you lose your home, you're going to grieve. Name something else that if you lost it, you would grieve. Car? Couldn't get to work, couldn't get to church, okay? self-esteem, you can lose your self-esteem. There are things that you can experience either by choice, and let's admit it, sometimes we do stupid things. We do, sometimes ignorantly, sometimes stubbornly, sometimes selfishly and sinfully. We can do things that cause us to experience things that really do harm our self-esteem. And we can lose our self-esteem and feel like dirt, like we don't matter anymore, because we've been so stupid that we did this, or so stupid that we did not do that. How about something else that you could lose that would shake you up? Billfold. 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 Why is a billfold such a big deal? It's got your driver's license in it and credit cards in it, okay? So, and your phone, okay, then you lose your phone. See there, and when you lose things, it has an effect on you, doesn't it? It has an emotional effect on you. And it has a mental effect on you. And your mind starts rolling. And when your mind starts rolling when you suffered loss, it goes a million different directions, and the vast majority of those directions are negative. And when your mind is rolling in that way, what's your feeler doing? Your feeler is rolling in overdrive in a very negative way. And so what do you end up with? You end up with yourself being a mess. What about losing your faith? In the third session today, after lunch, we're going to talk about that very thing. Do not underestimate the power of loss in a human being's life, even a person of faith. There are people who have suffered extreme losses in their life. And because of the effect of that, they've lost their faith. That is the power of loss. That's how cruel and brutal and negative the impact can be in our life. See, when we suffer loss, if it's something that we had a value placed on it within us, it's going to have an effect on us. In Matthew 6, Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Your heart follows your treasure. The thing that puts a price tag on things is your heart. See, I drive a 2012 Nissan Versa. Has about 150,000 miles on it. It's worth about, Blue Book, about $2,700. If I can find a man, though, who took his first girlfriend out in a 2012 Nissan Versa, and it was a great date that ended up in them getting married, he might pay me way more than $2,700 or $2,800 for it, because there's a sentimental value. His 2012 Nissan Versa might be the same white color as mine. See, we place a high value on. What about your health? Anybody here told they have cancer? Oh, yeah. Anybody told here that they have Parkinson's disease, like my wife was diagnosed with? And you stop and think about, here's a young lady that goes to a college, and in a violent experience, she's raped. She's lost her virginity by a violent act. Do you think that young lady's going to grieve? Yeah, and she needs to. Now let's flip the coin on the other side. Here's a godly young lady. She's grown up in the church. She loves the Lord, sincerely loves the Lord. But her feeler gets the best of her. And in a moment of passion, she gifts her virginity to somebody she's not married to. Do you think that godly young lady is going to grieve that? I hope she does, because that's repentance. We need to weep and mourn about the sin in our life. That's a part of that repentance experience. You know, stop and think about the loss of a friend by betrayal, maybe by sin. If we valued that friendship, it's going to have an effect on us. We're going to grieve because of it. There are all kinds of things in this life that we have the potential of losing. What we need to realize is it's going to have an effect on us. And what that's going to do is it's going to put us on a journey that we don't want. It's going to put us on a journey because it's a forced change. Some changes in our life we choose. I talked to some of you out in the foyer, and you weren't born and raised here. You moved here. You made a choice to relocate. You know, there are times that we make choices, you know, about where we work, who we marry. You know, there are all kinds of choices we make that are changes. Loss is a forced change. Now, when we've experienced a forced change, what is automatic is that there's an ending and there's a new beginning. With every loss, with every change, there is a loss and then a new beginning. But here's the problem. It's not like going to the wall and flipping the switch. You can't do that. You cannot do that. It's not humanly possible. You're a human. You've got to deal with it as a human, not as a machine. You know, a machine, you can just flip a switch. Human beings, we don't have switches to flip. When we're dealing with forced change, there's an ending, but there's also a new beginning. Okay, the ending, what we're talking about, the ending is loss. You've lost something. Now, what you want and need is a new beginning. But you can't get there without going through the forest. The forest is the neutral zone. You are in a forest that is a weird place. Here's a description of that weird place. Yes, it's a forest. Number one, there are no paths. And there are no footprints. You're on your own to get through the forest to the new beginning. Now, what's really weird is there are no pathways, there are no footprints, but they're people. I told you this was weird. And some of the people in that neutral zone in your life are going to be a blessing. But there's also going to be people in your life who are not going to be a blessing. There are people in your life that are going to neglect you. Because we have all done that. There's not a single person sitting in this room, nor standing, that is not guilty of neglect. We have all sometimes known better, known about something that was needed to be done, somebody needed to be helped, but we didn't. We've all done that, some to a greater degree than others. There are going to be people in this neutral zone time in your life when you're really struggling because of this forced change of loss. And they're not going to be helpful. As a matter of fact, some of them are going to say things that are going to be very hurtful. Now, that's not their intent, but they're going to say things that are very hurtful to you. Let me tell you about a line that sometimes a widowed person will hear that, in my opinion, is the most offensive thing you can say. I know how you feel. I know how you feel. How in the world could you possibly? As a matter of fact, we're going to talk about that sort of thing in that last session after lunch. How could you possibly? And then there are people who are going to say, you're still wearing your ring? Now, what business is it of theirs if you choose to wear your ring? By the way, one of the 3 books I've written back there in the foyer is a book called After the End Comes, and there's a chapter in there about something I've never heard anybody, never read anybody write about, and that's rings. What do you do about the rings after loss? Well, there are people who are going to say and do things that are going to be hurtful, they're going to be neglectful, but they're also going to be supportive and helpful people. When you're in that neutral zone in your life, you might think you're going crazy. You might think you're going crazy. You might think that you're going to snap. You're going to struggle. The reason you're going to struggle doesn't have to do with your faith, though that might contribute to it. And we'll talk about that, especially tomorrow. But you're going to struggle. And you're going to wonder, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this? Why am I struggling like this so much? The person that I've lost, they're in a better place. They're in a place I want to go to. Why do I feel this way? The answer to that question is you're human. One of the struggles with dealing with life after loss, no matter what the valued thing was that you lost, one of the difficulties in dealing with all of that is the fact we live in a grief-illiterate society. We haven't talked about this kind of thing. We haven't provided insight about this sort of thing, and so people struggle because they don't know about the process of grieving. They don't know how needful it is, and they don't know how to do it. And then that's why people are not served as they ought to be effectively when they've experienced loss. And that's why sometimes we don't grieve in a healthy way. It's because we don't know anything about it. And that's why we talk about this kind of thing. What people need more than anything when they suffered loss is that they need the Lord. Because there's a weakness. There is an inability to see things correctly. And what we need in our life so much when we're struggling with adversity is we need the Lord. In the worship time, when I'm preaching, we're going to talk about this verse at the end of that lesson. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. See, that's what a person who's in that neutral zone needs. They need to have their strength renewed. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and walk and not be faint. I love David's perspective. David said, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that's higher than I. Beautiful, beautiful spirit. It is such a struggle. Sometimes we don't understand how much of a struggle we may go through. And then we begin to question ourselves. The second week in January of 2014, after my wife passed away, I was sitting in an empty house, and I said out loud, what's wrong with me? I've never done that. I'm not a talk to myself kind of person. I said, what's wrong with me? I was really struggling. You know, here I was, I'd been a Christian since I was a late teen. I went to a Christian school. I have a degree in Bible. I've been a preacher for years. What in the world is wrong with me? And then I went to the computer, you know, where all the answers are. And I started searching for help for widows and widowers. And you know what I found? Virtually nothing. And that's my come to Jesus moment. That's what my daughter calls it. That's my come to Jesus moment. But man, somebody needs to do something to raise awareness about what it's like, not just to suffer loss, but the greater challenge, living with it the rest of your life, every day and every night. That's the greater challenge. Loss is awful. Living with loss may very well be the greatest challenge that we ever face this side of eternity. I think it'd be a really good thing for us to talk about it. We're going to take a break. Please consider yourself dismissed for a while. Now, let me suggest to you that there needs to be some way that we get you back in here, and we'll leave that to Steve. And if you don't listen to what Steve does to herd you back in here, I'm going to threaten you. And here's what I'm going to threaten you with. I know Barry Manilow tunes.
Let me assure you, it's not pretty.
Yeah. I Can't Smile Without You is my favorite. So you better get back in here. Let's take a break.